Once again, this is called The Liver, a parable. 1. In the village, the speakers were the ancient sages. In the daytime, they sat in wooden rocking chairs or lay down on thatched mats made of hay and straw and watched the passing clouds, the children at play, and the men and women at work. At night-time, they sat in wooden rocking chairs or lay down on thatched mats made of hay and straw and watched the radiant moon, the animals at rest, and the men and women busy with love and sorrow and prayer and greed. The faces of the ancient sages were very wrinkled and drawn in towards the center, so that the words that came out seemed to be sucked out of their tired bones and then released into the air, where they would bless or curse or guide or scold. Occasionally a speaker would lift his or her stiff and fragile body and begin to walk around the compound, leaving behind a creaking chair. The speaker on the move would then caress a child or spit on a mischievous dog or tell a joke to entertain a woman cooking a hearty stew or a man carving a clock. On rare occasions, the speaker would wander out to the far edges of town or into the forest to meet in secret an angel or a devil or a saint. Sometimes the speaker would not return. If and when the speaker did return, he or she would spend the following days very quiet, resting and sipping on a tea made of potent herbs and snake blood, and at times hissing to the shadows. In between the speakers who told the stories of the tribe and the domestic beasts that served the hunger, thirst, and livelihood of the human bodies, there was the listening. The listening was like time, but it could not be counted like the beads of an abacus or even built like a tower of Babel. The listening had the wild course of a jungle vine and the personality of a sensual being. Was it the material world or the astral plane? Somewhere in between, it was either a spirit guide or a trickster. It could tell the truth or be deceived. It was pure light, and it loved to shine. Signs of the listening were everywhere. The drops of rain, the rays of the sun, the colors of the rainbow, the recipes of the cooks, and the many books in the library all emerged out of the listening. The signs took on a life of their own. This life could be called a half-life or a dream state, for it was not self-aware. Instead, the life of the signs was like the feeling of an object as it free falls through empty space. This was either very clear or very confusing to the people of the village. One being in particular was famous for asking, "If I looked in the mirror traveling at the speed of light, would I or would I not see myself?" You see, there was also a middle group who understood the confusion very well, but could not move forward or backwards. They could only create lovely images, a language of reflection. Let us call the citizens of this place sounds. The imagination of the sounds was brilliant as the elements of fire, air, water, ether, and earth. It could heat, cool, wet, dry, and transport. It could also endlessly combine the elements to produce new scenes of experience, as well as practice alchemy to reverse decay, restore order, and return consciousness to its golden age. The willpower that drove this imagination was like a meditator seeking to find balance between center and circumference, or a noble prince at battle. This story will begin where something became stuck going down the passageway. Is it Adam that is choking on a bite of apple, or is it A for arbitrary? Once upon a time, there was a witch named Juliet who had accidentally cursed herself. Was it the brainwashing of her nakedness as shameful, or a wardrobe malfunction? Juliet's skin was the beautiful dark color of cocoa, and her teeth and eyes seemed to glow a bright white when she smiled bravely or gazed awestruck or grimaced with pain. Her intuition had a scar on it whose healing would take the efforts of many souls working in unison and perhaps multiple lifespans. 2. It was morning when Juliet woke. The day was a blank canvas and yet destined to pass. There was a song playing in her heart center like a radio left on, and the sleep in her eyes was a pleasant fog. Her whole body sounded om. The emotions were already beginning to paint. There was red and guilt, green and touch, blue and felt. The other side of guilt was her humanness, her speech, and her tribe's use of symbols to see into the world beyond this one. Her intuition was the seer, and the will to be free drove her closer and closer to true reality. She stretched her limbs, her connective tissue, and her mouth wide in a luxurious yawn, sensing the opening of the nadis or rivers throughout her body. Between novelty and habit, her senses informed her of where she was. Through her practice of yoga, she was aware of her body from the inside out, the shape of its cavities, and the channel of evolutionary consciousness at its center. The uncertainty that drew her to the surface was a language of blood, impulse, and art. The dreams of her people formed a map, or rather an iron quilt, that covered her skin, sweat through her pores, cried through her eyes, and glowed with resonance. Was it a world at war, or the self-realization of a creative spirit? Was it destruction or literature? Was it self-expression or an identity crisis? There was an experiment done on the power of hope. A group of lab rats had been dropped into a whirlpool. They swam against the current for an hour before drowning. Was this fatalism or giving up? A second group of lab rats were dropped into the same whirlpool, but this time the rats were removed after 45 minutes, dried off, warmed by blow dryers, allowed to rest, and then dropped back into the whirlpool. This time the rats swam for 100 hours. Is this a true story? A teaching tool, or a character exaggerated to form like a voice of no one, or the sensitivity of a thyroid gland to disturbances in relation? It was told to me by a student of Tantra. 3. The spine was the avenue of both transcendence and fragmentation. Interesting as the pieces of a puzzle, its compositions were structural and fluid, defining and elusive, simultaneously reaching out and rooting down. Think of the spine as a film projector, giving shape to the perception of depth. The gravitational field was the weight of history, a debt and a gift, a right and a duty. The value of loss was in the presence of the moment until it too was gone.